Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. The Our Driving Concern Employer Traffic Safety Program is pleased to offer the highway grade crossing safety webinar today. First off, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Jim Ruiz. Jim is a 12-year TxDOT rail safety investigator. He is retired from the City of San Antonio Traffic Engineering. He is also a volunteer with Operation Lifesaver, an Army veteran, married 36 years, enjoys traveling, outdoor activities, camping, hiking, and canoeing. A few things I want to note before we get started. Everyone is muted, but you do have the ability to type questions by clicking on the chat button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen during the webinar. The presenter may answer your question during the presentation or choose to address questions at the end. I believe Jim will be addressing them at the end. If you should encounter any problems or issues, please just type a message and let us know. The presenter and Our Driving Concerns program managers' contact information excuse me, will be available later on in the presentation. There's a very brief post-event survey at the conclusion of the webinar, and as this program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers, we would greatly appreciate your giving us your feedback. You can receive a copy of the presentation by requesting it in the post-event survey notes. With the presentation, you will also receive the program manager and the presenter's contact information and any additional information that is worthwhile. With that, I welcome Jim, and we'll turn it over to him to begin. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being available today. Again, my name is Jim Ruiz, Rail Safety Investigator for the state of Texas, Texas Department of Transportation. I am in the signal discipline. Our section is the Rail Safety Division under the TxDOT Department of Transportation. I am the signal lead investigator for the highway grade crossing section. What we do is we provide inspections or assistance through the FRA inspection program through the partnership that the state has with the FRA. We are inspectors providing inspection on FRA federal regulations that the railroad has to adhere to. And in doing so, we come across a lot of unsafe conditions, and it's why I have looked into trying to be more involved in presentations as well as volunteering work for the promotion of safety awareness out at the grade crossings. And so with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide, and that is, here we go. That is that our safety mission is, Safety Mission Zero is a 24/7, 365 days a year purpose that we have in trying to eliminate or trying to enhance safety, but eliminate any unsafe conditions out in the grade crossings on the roadway with vehicles that are traversing over the grade crossings where there are trains that are typically traveling through the tracks. So I have here some contributing factors that add to the unsafe conditions at the grade crossings, and some of the factors are the failure to stop for a train. In the investigations that we do, we find that there is a lot of concerns where the motorists are not attentive or not paying attention. And so the contributing factors are driver inattention, or distraction in the vehicle, failure to heed the warning signs that are out there, the signs that are on the roadway, advising of certain conditions that are on the crossings. For instance, there might be a rough crossing, or there might be some construction out there. And also the failure to stop at a proper place. Various times individuals or motorists park at a traffic signal light or a stop sign, and they don't have the clearance of the tracks, not knowing that they're still on the tracks, and which is again a hazard out there. Other contributing factors are the disregard for the stop sign or a light that is out there prior to the crossing or the intersection. Other things are fatigue. They might not have had a good rest and are not all that attentive to what they're doing at the time. Impaired visibility. Other factors are, of course, as we all know, cell phones and texting and driving. Those are also contributing factors that we are looking at that is a trend nowadays, and that we have to be vigilant 24/7 in trying to inform the general public or to the motorists, trying to advise them and give them as much information as possible in trying to get them to understand the conditions and the unsafe information that's out there for them, that they need to be making sure that they're paying attention to what they're doing. Also, this other slide is basically just information that we can pass along. It's the basic. It is what is called the DOT number at a crossing location, which is the Department of Transportation identification number at a crossing. It's kind of like your address at your home or an address of an establishment. This identification number is on a plate that is very readily available right there at the mechanism as you're approaching the tracks. Now that number is the ID number of the location, plus it will also have the emergency number to the railroad the railroad that is responsible for maintenance of that track. So if you find yourself in a situation that you're needing to call someone or advise someone of an unsafe or a malfunction that is at the location, that would be the best method of communications that you can have, is directly to the railroad. And that is because as soon as they receive your call, they would be available to inform any of the trains that are in that close proximity to try and avoid that crossing, and also to advise them of slower speeds that they might need to take depending on the situation. Now, other information, and this information also is at the bungalow. As you see the slide there, it says Bel Air Boulevard. That is giving you, that's at the bungalow or the communication controller box that's there on the side of the crossing. That one would have the address. It also has what the railroad uses as a milepost number, and that's primarily for their use, and that would be also considered similar to the DOT number. And it has that 1-800 number, and that goes directly to the railroad as mentioned. So that information is very critical when someone is finding themselves at a crossing and they need to communicate to the railroad. Now, other factors are the regulatory signs, we find that a lot of the motorists are not attentive, that they're paying attention to other things, they're just distracted, and therefore they do not catch some of these signs, or they pass through these signs and are not aware of what the sign is indicating. So the regulatory signs is very critical as well, because it can tell you what not to do or what to do or where to stop at or what type of tracks are out there, if there's multiple tracks, and whether it's a divided highway. And those signs are primarily at locations where you're needing to adhere to and follow, so that way you wouldn't get stuck, or that you wouldn't know not to do a right turn when it's telling you not to do a right turn. And also to understand that it's not just one track that you're going to be going across, so that you analyze that and understand that there's multiple tracks out there, so therefore you're going to traverse a longer distance. So those two are very critical, and it's something that is overlooked in most cases. The other signs that are out there are the warning signs, and these are fairly simple. You see the color yellow. They are for that reason to attract your sight for you to be looking at, and it's giving you some warning as to the shape or the size or the condition of that crossing, therefore letting you know to slow down or to be aware of potholes that are in the close proximity, or that it's a rough crossing, or that it's a hump crossing for some of the truck drivers out there. In most cases, they may overlook that sign, and they go and they traverse that crossing only to get stuck on there. And then again, that is the purpose of understanding that that blue sign is there, and so therefore you can call the railroad and make sure that you let them know that you got stuck, and that if there are any trains in the area, for them to be notified. So all these come in line with each other. Also, the low ground clearance sign will also give you that advance warning. Two, nowadays we have the no train horn. A lot of crossings nowadays are quiet zones, which are you will not hear the train blow its horn. So we need to make sure that we are mindful of that sign, that there is the train, as most of us think that they're very loud and make a lot of noise, that we can hear them. A lot of times you'll find that the train is pretty quiet, and therefore can approach you very sudden. So we need to understand that there is going to be no train being blown at those crossings. And so those signs are up there. If, again, those signs are not there, or if they're tagged over or somehow not visible, then we call the railroad on that particular blue sign, call the railroad and let them know that those signs are not visible. That way it would also help in any other situations where someone may find themselves not knowing that it's a quiet zone. Another sign there that is very important is the uneven tracks. A lot of complaints that we get is because the motorist is traveling too fast when they're going through the crossing, and they have tires blow out, or they have some damage done to their vehicle. Those signs are there indicating that it's a rough crossing, or it's an uneven track, and therefore you need to make some speed adjustments. So those are most of those will be in the yellow frame. And it's very good to know. It's quite helpful and helping to save on your maintenance of your vehicle. And also the other signs that show the track on one side of the road or the other side, those are the ones that are parallel to the tracks, or at some time it crosses a road, but there's a parallel road next to it. So it will indicate that you're coming up to a crossing or to a road that is going to be crossing over the tracks. So that too will indicate, to be alerted of the tracks that you're going to be traversing over. These signs are typically close proximity of the crossing, so therefore you would see them right as you go through the crossing. Now, the other concern is also a clearance, which is what we were talking about a little while ago, is that there's some pavement markings on the road indicating where that do not stop on tracks and where stop here signs, those regulatory signs. There's also going to be some pavement markings out there on the roadway, and one of them is what is considered the stop bar, which is that white line that goes across the roadway, indicating that you should stop there because the distance allowable, the stopping distance allowable before you get to the tracks, the rails. So as you can see on some of these pictures, the vehicle had gone past the gate crossing, or the gate, and stopped right before the tracks as the train was coming. So we see that quite often where the motorist is not aware of the space that he has and where he should be stopping his vehicle. So, and of course, this is due to the contributing factors of not paying attention or being distracted or doing other things while you're driving and coming across a crossing. So those are very, very critical. You also, even after you have traversed the crossing, make sure that you have the clearance after the crossing, because at times, especially larger vehicles, they tend to have, they still have a section of their truck or their trailer that they're hauling and still on the tracks because they're not familiar with the distance or the clearance that vehicle has. And so instances have happened where the train hits the trailer in the rear, or hits a truck that's still, with part of its tail part on the tracks. So we want to make sure there's a saying that is passed on through Operation Lifesaver, and that is, if you don't fit, don't commit. Meaning that you need to understand the distance, the clearance that you have if you're coming up to a stop sign, or if you're coming up to a traffic signal, or if there's a vehicle in front of you, that you make sure that prior to you coming through those tracks, that you're going to have that distance to clear the tracks, that you're going to have that space in front of you that will put you off the tracks. So that is very critical, and at times people just travel as a platoon or as a queue at a traffic light. They follow each other without understanding that that light's going to go red pretty soon, and you're going to be stuck in the middle of the tracks. So I know it's not something that we typically do, but it is something that we need to enhance awareness on, is that the driving abilities of everyone should start being considering the way they drive, and to make sure that they have those critical issues that they're aware of, that they know that they're going across a grade crossing, and that they're going to have enough space to clear the tracks if they're having to stop at the light or stop at the stop sign. Those are very critical issues that we encounter. And here, these are photos of some of the crossing types that are out there. You have your flashers, you have your cantilevers overhead, you have regular gates and lights, and you also have your pedestrian crossings now that more and more are being incorporated into the crossings so that pedestrians also have a gate that is warning them not to go across the crossing. And this is what this next slide is. It's passive crossings are just your crossbucks, your normal. Some of them are private crossings that only have your crossbucks. They might have a yield sign. They might have a stop sign. Your active crossings are the flashers, the crossings that have flashers and gates and bells. Some of your upgrades may have, or those are your standard upgrades, which is your flashers. A lot of the rural areas have flashers and bells. More in your suburbs and metropolitan areas, you will have more crossings that have flashers, gates, the bells, and possibly even cantilevers. And even in some instances, you might have pre-signals. Pre-signals are the signals that are in advance of a crossing that are utilized to stop the traffic prior to them queuing over the tracks, and the signal beyond that after the crossing will clear the queue, so therefore you wouldn't have any motorists stacking on the track. Those are very are not used as much simply because it might be quite expensive to have two signals in one location. However, it does seem to be a good idea and possibly a good method in saving lives that might very well be involved in an incident there because they got queued up at a track. You also have quiet zones that we talked about earlier. They got race medians, they got flashers, they got gates, and they got bells. Some of the quiet zones will also have flashers with quad gates and, of course, your gates and bells. So those are just the different types of crossings that are available, that are out there. And so everyone, if you see multiple gates, and they operate a little differently too. We receive calls on that one of them, the gate, as you approach the crossing, the gate came down, but the other gate, as you're leaving the crossing, did not come down at the same time, or there was a delay. There's those crossings, there's a purpose for that, and that's so that is considered to be an exit gate. So that gate does not necessarily come down at the same time. It will allow the car to move off the crossing, and as long as there is no presence of a vehicle there and there's a time limit on it, that gate will again come down prior to the train arriving at the crossing. So those are the different types of crossings. Now, anytime that there's a malfunction, the railroad is required to provide protection. Sometimes it might be in the form of a police officer being out there. It might be in a form of a flagman being out there. So that is the federal regulation, is that whenever there is a malfunction or the equipment is not working as intended, the railroad is required to respond to that call and provide protection, and also to inform the train that there is a malfunction and they need to take measures as provided to them by their procedures. And there is a state law. There is a state law indicating that in the transportation code that provides direction on whether one is doing something wrong whenever they're not following the advice of the railroad as far as the signals and everything else that's going on at the crossing. The statute that is out there is out of the state law, is that there is regulations prohibiting anyone from stopping or trying to go around the gates or trying to beat the train or any of those instances. The operator commits an offense if the operator drives around, under, or through a crossing gate or a barrier at a railroad crossing while the gate or barrier is closed, being closed, or being open. So there is a monetary rule that the enforcement can use on traveling public or a motorist, and the offense is punishable by $50 or more, no more than $200. It is something that is not typically used, but it's also a tool that is out there in the form of trying to enhance or to provide more safety awareness. And one of those tools is to have law enforcement to assist by being more actively following this regulation of this rule, state rule. And with that, just basically, this last slide indicates that there are situations out there where even though you have gates, lights, and flashers and bells, they might not always work properly. So always expect a train. You need to look, listen, and therefore live to continue another day. That is my presentation. I hope that it was informative. And if there are any questions, please submit them. I will provide information and answer them as best as I can, or provide direction as to where we can obtain that information. Katie, if we're okay with time?
Yes, if anybody has any questions, like I said, go ahead and submit them through the chat function. As of right now, I don't see any. So the other thing is, you know, we do ask that you complete the post-event survey, and if you would like Jim's contact information as well as any, I believe he has a resource page that he was going to provide as well, and with his presentation, please note that in the comment section of the post-event survey. All right, Jim, it looks like I don't believe anybody has any questions at this time, so thank you, Jim, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate the information that you shared. Hopefully this will help employers keep their employees safer. We appreciate every attendee taking a few minutes to complete the post-event survey. With that, this concludes the webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
Have a good day.